Hello. So I recently watched the film On the Silver Globe, and I'm just going to give my thoughts on it real quick. So it's definitely out there. It's a science fiction film, Polish film, made in the mid '70s. Very surreal. The way I learned about it was someone showed me the trailer, and I was immediately hooked. I'm like, okay, I need to get on this stuff ASAP because it reminded me a little bit of Aguirre, The Wrath of God, in the style that it was filmed in, kind of like the costumes. You could tell that more money was put into the costumes than was put into the actual camera work and cinematography in some cases. And sort of you have these wider shots and more matter of fact looking cinematography that differs a lot from something like Spielberg or something where you have just the spamming of mid shots and everything. Everything's very formulaic, and you kind of know you're watching a high budget, well produced movie. This feels almost like a documentary or something, and I do like that style of film. I even thought, like, hey, this is kind of what it would look like if Jodorowsky's Dune were to be adapted to the big screen, because we tend to think of that as living within the concept art, but in reality, if it were actually committed to film, it would have looked quite different. So this all made me highly intrigued. I do recommend that you certainly watch the trailer, because it's certainly very evocative. But I watched it, and overall, ultimately, unfortunately, I was disappointed because I really wanted to like this movie, but ultimately, I think it's kind of a piece of shit. It's not. There's not nothing I liked. There's little moments I liked, but they're few and far between. And overall, like 95% of it, I think, is basically unworkable, which is unfortunate. To add a little bit of context, right? Poland was part of the Soviet Union during that time, and the Soviet Union shut it down. I'm fairly certain that the reason it was shut down was because the film was based on a series of novels, a trilogy called the Lunar Trilogy, written in 1900, and it's very similar to Dune in a sense. So some moderate spoilers here, but it involves the sort of the foundation of a unique people and a unique culture on a planet, right? And a sort of a religious or a messiah-like prophecy that they come to believe in. So that's early for a story like that, and it's also quite critical of socialism and authoritarianism. So in the novels, I mean. So I think that's why it was banned, even though those themes are obviously kind of moved to the background of the film. Evidently not enough. So what happened was the director finally released the film in about 10 years later, and he kind of interspaced little stock footage where he would describe, the scenes that were missing. So it is an unfinished film, which makes for a chaotic viewing experience. That was not my problem with it. It's kind of like Game of Death in that sense. That doesn't bother me. What does bother me was that there's two main problems. One, the pacing is really bad. The pacing is abysmal. It is so slow, and that's okay. That's fine. I'm not some guy who needs constant movement every 5 seconds. In fact, I think it's actually kind of relaxing how films can broaden your attention span in that way. Like, okay, it's not a YouTube video, right? It's a movie. We're allowed to sit down. We're allowed to just take in a scene. The shot of the jungle can last for quite a while, right? And we can still be engaged because we want to see what's happening there. But if you're going to do a slow pace, it still has to eventually build to something. You have to have power, right? Like Once Upon a Time in the West. And this did not, I feel. It had an issue that is common with low-budget films. And I don't say this as a knock against low-budget stuff. I love low-budget stuff, obviously. But I think a particular disease that can afflict low-budget films more than other films is that things just feel uninspired, and things, characters, people, scenes, they lack contrast in relation to other scenes, and it kind of blends together with a sort of averageness that is extremely difficult to escape from. And it's really unfortunate when that happens, but that was very much the sense that I got here. Also, the second issue, maybe even the more serious issue I had with it was you would have this constant monologuing. The characters would go on these, they would just like talk in front of a camera, theater type acting. I don't like theater. I don't like theater people. I never have, never gotten along with them. I don't like the way theater does things, theater kids. Uh, it's so bad. It's so bad. They're overacting always. It always the way that because with theater, you're like, oh, woe is me, and then this is what I feel. This is what I think. That's how it was. I'm gonna list the themes of this novel overtly. Sorry, this movie overtly. And it was kind of cheap. It was kind of just like, okay, this is kind of like bleeding heart humanitarian stuff that isn't even that deep. It's kind of fucking stupid. But yeah, I did not enjoy that aspect of it at all. And it's constant, right? You have a character going on a monologue for like 5 minutes straight, and then the next one and the next one. It just kind of made me cringe and really took me out of it. Now, it wasn't all bad. There were a few scenes that I really liked. The costumes, of course, were wonderful, especially of the tribesmen. I think that was its main strength. I talked a little bit about the cinematography being unusual in some parts, but I did like it in some parts. Specifically where there's a scene where the Shern is on the beach. It's wounded. It's walking along the shore, maybe about waist deep of water, and a tribesman is approaching it. I thought that was a very good scene. It doesn't last long, but it was a very good scene, and that's because the sky, the ocean, even the beach, they're all kind of this blue tint, and then the horizon between the sky and the sea, it kind of decoheres, and you really get the sense that you're looking at something very ethereal, very much from another world. And the design of the Shern itself is very good in a way that, in my opinion, only a low-budget film could accomplish. Because when you have a low budget, you need to get weird necessarily if you're gonna compete with the same level of quality, because the high budget approaches to depicting things are not available to you, right? You do not have advanced CGI, you do not have advanced animatronics as would be more applicable to this production. You probably don't even have advanced costumes, and the costume is not very advanced, but it nevertheless manages to be very effective. Because it's not even trying to imitate life. You don't really get the sense, seeing this thing move, that you are witnessing an alien or an animal or a human or even anything that's really alive. You get the sense that you're looking at a piece of animated driftwood or seaweed or something like that. It's very alien, and I think that is how low budget stories win when they do win over the high budget ones. It's by stepping outside of the traditional way of doing things, right? Let's not depict it as an alien, as a straightforward alien. Let's try to make it. Let's evoke something else, and I think that was successful. Less so when you later in the film when you see their design more, but in that scene specifically, there was something very deep-seated and psychological about the Shern with the way it stretched its wings. It reminded me a lot of Mothman, and I do believe that Mothman was very much a sort of psychological entity, this deep-seated thing, this image that people were receptive to, that people kind of want to form in their brain, in the same way the predecessor of that might be, winged demons and stuff in art from the Renaissance and things like that. It's just this very basal, very subconscious projection, right? So in that sense, I don't really see it as an alien even. I see it as something that comes from within. It's actually a part of humanity in that way. So yeah, that was the thing I really liked. Again, costume design, girl with the two eyes, that was very evocative, very good there. But again, overall, I think it just didn't come together very well. Interesting concepts, interesting set pieces, but it's important. I think it's very important that the film actually comes together, and that the film itself is aesthetically pleasing, as an object of beauty, because that's different, I guess, than the director of Gummo might disagree with me, right? Because he's kind of like, I see films as just, there's a scene here, there's a scene here, and that's it, right? That's okay if we have a good scene. But I disagree. So, yeah, those are my thoughts on The Silver Globe.